This is not breaking news. This is not a scandal. This is not about one person. What you're watching is quieter than that. A system learning it can do things it was never meant to do. And then learning, no one can stop it fast enough. Not because the rules vanished, because the rules still exist on paper, while the power that's supposed to be checked starts moving as one body. Enforcement, investigation, punishment, even the economy's steering wheel, all pulled toward the same survival instinct. If that sounds abstract, good. That's how it hides, and that's why it works. Stay with me. Subscribe if you want the next pieces as they land. Because once you see the mechanism, you can't unsee it. And the mechanism is already turning. So let's start with what's actually in control now, before it decides you're not. You're told the system is controlled by laws, by courts, by procedures, by professional norms. But that's not what controls it in a stress test. What controls it is leverage. Who can inflict cost? Quickly, quietly, repeatedly. Who can make an institution fear the next headline, the next subpoena, the next raid, the next funding fight, the next career-ending threat? Because independence isn't a vibe, it's a boundary. And boundaries only exist when they're defended in real time. So when you see enforcement acting like an occupying force, when you see investigations aimed sideways, when you see journalism treated like a target instead of a check, when you see an independent central bank treated like a political tool, that's not a list of controversies. That's one system learning it can merge. And here's the dangerous part. It doesn't need everyone to surrender. It only needs enough, which brings us to the shift that made all of this feel normal. So normal you almost missed it. There was a time when the scandal was the interference, the pressure, the phone call, the hint, because the norm was distance. Before meant enforcement enforces. Courts review. Prosecutors prosecute cases, not people. Journalists dig. And the central bank moves slowly because it has to, now means the boundary itself is negotiable, not abolished, negotiable, softened under the language of security or order, or just asking questions, or we're not involved. That's the silent shift. The most dangerous change is the one that arrives without a siren. It arrives as procedure, as paperwork, as exceptions, until exceptions become the operating system. And once the public learns to live with exceptions, power learns something too. It can push again, and again, and again. Which is why the next shock matters, not for its novelty, but because it shows what the system is willing to do in plain sight. Early 2026, you see it in one moment that should stop the whole machine. A federal agent, a woman in her car, a shot to the face, she dies. And then, almost instantly, an official story that doesn't match what the video shows. That gap is not a PR problem. That gap is the warning label. Because if a government can move from lethal force to a false narrative without hesitation, it's telling you something about its expectation of consequences, or the lack of them. And watch what happens next in the ecosystem. Not equal outrage, not equal alarm, not equal pushback. The response is selective. The attention is conditional. And that teaches the system where the pain actually is, where resistance actually forms, where it doesn't. If you want the rest of this mapped, subscribe. I'm going to keep walking it forward, because once you see which shocks get ignored, you can predict the next ones. And the next one isn't about a body. It's about the steering wheel of the economy, and who thinks they get to grab it. Here's the mechanism. And it's simpler than people want it to be. Independent institutions don't have armor, they have habits, they have customs, they have people willing to say no, even when no costs them something. So the play is not to outlaw independence, it's to make independence expensive. You apply pressure in parallel, you flood the zone with investigations and threats, you make examples, you normalize force on the street, and you quietly loosen the internal rules that used to slow you down. Who benefits? The people who need short-term control, the people who fear the next election, the people who know the clock is running. Who absorbs the damage? Everyone else. Because the cost doesn't land as one dramatic collapse. It lands as uncertainty, as volatility, as fear, as silence. And then something revealing happens. The loudest resistance often arrives only when the pressure touches money, which is why the next crisis moves faster. Shorter fuse, higher stakes, and it ends with a line you're not supposed to hear out loud. They try to remove an independent official. It doesn't work. Not yet. So they go higher. They start circling the central bank itself, not with policy arguments, with power. And suddenly, you see a different kind of outrage. Not for the dead, not for the raid, not for the chilled press, for the Fed, for markets, for interest rates, for the idea that someone might juice the economy on command, because that's when the people with the biggest microphones hear the scraping sound. And while that fight is happening, another signal hits, a reporter's home, federal agents, materials seized. The government says it's not about targeting the reporter. They always say that. But the point isn't what they say. The point is the move. The move tells every other journalist what it could cost to keep digging. 2 tracks, same direction. Control the money, control the story. And now we're close to the real accelerant, the calendar. 8 months. Here's where this stops being a theory and becomes your life. Because you don't live inside institutions. You live inside outcomes. You live inside the moment you hesitate before you speak. Inside the moment you decide it's safer to scroll past, safer to stay quiet, safer to not be seen. You live inside the price tag that won't come down and the explanation that never quite explains it. And when power starts treating enforcement like loyalty and prosecutions like punishment and journalism like a threat and monetary policy like a lever, you don't get a press release telling you the rules changed. You just feel the air get heavier. This is how a system trains a population. Not with one dramatic decree, with repetition. If you've been watching and thinking, is it really that serious? Share this. Subscribe. Not because panic helps, because attention does. Because once you're trained to look away, the system learns you can be managed. And that brings us to the part the White House can't outrun. The midterms, the fear, the rush. This is the mistake people make. They think this is local, domestic, contained. But when the United States signals that its internal safeguards are optional, it doesn't stay inside our borders. It ripples. Because other governments watch, markets watch, allies watch, and adversaries watch with a notebook open. If the central bank can be treated like a political instrument, confidence isn't a feeling. It's a price. It's risk premium. It's volatility. It's the cost of borrowing rising, not because of fundamentals, but because of doubt. And if the press can be pressured through force, through seizures, through loosened rules, then truth becomes more expensive to produce, more dangerous to publish. That uncertainty exports itself. It touches trade. It touches currency expectations. It touches whether anyone believes a promise made by an American institution will still be honored when the next political panic hits. And once the outside world starts pricing in American instability, the inside accelerates. Because now the system is not just losing legitimacy, it's losing time. So here's where this goes next. Not one future, 3. 1. Adjustment. The institutions hold barely. Courts push back. Agencies resist, the political cost of pressure rises, independence survives, but only after visible damage and only because enough people decide no is worth the price. 2. Erosion. The more likely path historically because it feels survivable day to day. The Fed becomes independent in name, responsive in practice. Enforcement keeps expanding. Investigations keep selecting targets. Journalists keep calculating risk, and you adapt. Because humans adapt to almost anything. 3. Rupture. The fast break, a midterm shock, a legitimacy crisis, a contested outcome, a perceived threat that triggers more force, more exceptionalism, more temporary powers, until temporary becomes permanent. I'm not telling you which one happens. Because the system hasn't decided yet. It is watching feedback. It is measuring resistance. It is learning what it can get away with. And that means the next 8 months aren't just politics. They're a stress test. So if you're waiting for the moment where someone says clearly, this is the line, don't. Lines don't announce themselves anymore. They move quietly. And then one day you look back and realize the distance between before and now is a cliff. This system doesn't need you to agree with it. It doesn't need you to cheer. It needs you to adjust, to accept the new baseline, to treat the unusual as routine. Because once the baseline shifts, everything downstream shifts with it. What enforcement feels allowed to do, what prosecutors feel allowed to pursue, what journalists feel safe to print, what economic institutions feel permitted to resist. And the most dangerous part is this. The next escalation won't arrive as a headline you recognize. It will arrive as a decision you didn't notice. A rule quietly changed, a precedent quietly set. So subscribe, stay close. Share this with the person who thinks it can't happen here. and meet me in the next video, because the mechanism doesn't stop when we stop watching. It speeds up.